Good morning, and welcome to the virtual Natchez Literary and Cinema Celebration. I'm Lance Harris, Sites Director for the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, overseeing the Grand Village of the Natchez Indians and historic Jefferson College. Today, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Carter Burns as he presents Thomas Affleck, Steward of the Land. Carter Burns is the Executive Director of the historic Natchez Foundation. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in English from Millsaps College, a Juris Doctor from the University of Mississippi School of Law, and a Master of Historic Preservation from the University of Georgia. Prior to attending graduate school in historic preservation, Carter clerked for Judge John Roper, the Senior Magistrate Judge for the Southern District of Mississippi, and held the position of Senior Attorney for the Right-of-Way Division of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. A Natchez native, Carter worked part-time for the historic Natchez Foundation throughout high school and college. He came to his job as executive director already armed with deep knowledge of and abiding interest in the history and historic resources of the Natchez district. He is responsible for all staffing, operations, and programs of the historic Natchez Foundation. A former board member of the Mississippi Heritage Trust, he currently serves on the board of the Mississippi Historical Society. Now, before I hand it over, please note that we will monitor the comments section throughout our time for any questions that will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Now, please sit back and enjoy Mr. Carter Burns.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Lance. And let me get my presentation up. The Natchez area has been home to a number of people who are significant in American history, but are largely forgotten in Natchez today. Sometimes scholars in search of dissertation topics and books resurrect people from the past and give them new life. An example is the biography of John Quitman, published in 1985 by Robert May of Purdue University. Although a governor and congressman, Quitman was a forgotten player on the national political stage until Robert May wrote his definitive biography. Another largely forgotten figure in Natchez history is Thomas Affleck, whose importance as an agriculturalist and horticulturalist was largely forgotten until scholars began to reference the large body of his work preserved in archival collections of his papers and publications housed in the special collections at Hill Memorial Library at LSU and at the Briscoe Center for American History at the University of Texas. Thomas Affleck was the first influential horticulturalist to work and publish in the South. In his 2014 publication, Steward of the Land, author Lake Douglas reestablished the reputation of Affleck as a Renaissance man, a man described by the LSU Press as a tireless agricultural reformer, entrepreneur, and horticulturalist, with a wide range of interests: animal husbandry, agriculture, scientific farming, ornamental horticulture, insects, and hydrology. Affleck was born on July 13, 1812, in Dumfries, Scotland. He was named for his father, Thomas Affleck, and his mother was the former Mary Hannay. They were affluent enough to provide their son a college education, and he graduated from the University of Edinburgh, where he studied agriculture. 2 months before he turned 20, he immigrated to the United States and arrived on May 4, 1832, in New York. For the next 8 years, from 1832 until 1840, he worked as both a merchant and a clerk in New York, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and lastly, Ohio, where he began his career as an editor and publisher of horticultural journals. While living in Cincinnati, he became more widely known due to his position as first an assistant and then the editor of the Western Farmer and Gardener from 1840 until 1842. A list of agricultural newspapers published in the United States in the 1840s included only 10, and none were in the Deep South. In 1839, the Natchez area's growing interest in botanical and horticultural matters as branches of agriculture manifested itself in the formation of the Agricultural, Botanical, and Horticultural Society of Jefferson College, which held its organizational meeting on May 6th in College Hall on the campus of the college. The impetus for the organization came from the trustees and faculty of the college, and its founding members included planners and professional men from throughout the county. This woodcut or engraving of Jefferson College was produced by an artist employed by Thomas Affleck to produce seed packets and other visual imagery for his business. These founding members of the newly organized society were an esteemed group of individuals and included James Brabston, Dr. Samuel Cartwright, Henry LeGrand Connor, Isaac Dunbar, William J. Ferguson, James A. Gillespie, Thomas Hall, Henry Huntington, Felix Houston, Dr. J.C. Inge, William P. Mellon, William Newton Mercer, Ayers P. Merrill, James Metcalf, Volney Metcalf, William J. Miner, Thomas W. Newman, E.P. Pollard, James Rayleigh, Daniel Rawlings, Judge Edward Turner, Benjamin L.C. Wales, John P. Walworth, Thomas J. Wynn, and Joseph Wright. The objectives of the Agricultural, Botanical, and Horticultural Society of Jefferson College were threefold. First, the dissemination of useful knowledge and improvement in the propagation and culture of agricultural and horticultural productions. Second, the cultivation of a taste for rural improvement and the diffusion of the enjoyments which refined and cultivated minds find in such pursuits. And third, the improvement and decoration of the college grounds to render them more pleasing and attractive to the visitor as well as the student, and to facilitate the latter in the acquisition of botanical science. To achieve their objectives, the members of the society held exhibitions or fairs at Jefferson College. One of their first exhibits was held in August 1839 and consisted of fruits, flowers, and vegetables. Their goals, however, were much more ambitious and expanded to include fairs with exhibits of just about everything that could be classed as agricultural, botanical, and horticultural. The fair scheduled for November 1841 was to be their grandest. Organizers of the 1841 fair were especially excited about the plans for the accomplished editor of the Western Farmer to visit. Biographical information about Thomas Affleck appeared in a newspaper article in the Mississippi Free Trader prior to his arrival, and the newspaper wrote a glowing account of his visit to Natchez. During the same visit to Natchez, he also visited Baton Rouge and New Orleans, among other cities in the lower Mississippi Valley. An article published in the Times-Picayune indicates that New Orleans was as impressed as Natchez with Thomas Affleck. Affleck's attendance at the November Fair may have drastically changed the direction of his life. It was probably at the fair that he met the young widow Anna Dunbar Smith, daughter of Isaac Dunbar, an active member of the Agricultural, Botanical, and Horticultural Society of Jefferson College, and the chairman of horticulture. Anna's husband, Calvin Stephen Smith of Retirement Plantation, had died in 1838. Isaac Dunbar was a successful cotton planter and lived near Washington, Mississippi. He was the son of early settler Robert Dunbar, who lived at Oakley Grove Plantation near the Natchez Adams County Airport. Isaac Dunbar is buried in the Oakley Grove Cemetery, which was painstakingly restored 40 years ago by Lester and Betty McGee. Isaac was married twice. His first wife was Mary Wilkinson, niece of General James Wilkinson, and his second wife and the mother of his daughter Anna was his first wife's sister, Elizabeth Wilkinson. Mary and Elizabeth had a third sister, Jane, who married Dr. James Long and became known to some as the Mother of Texas, a title that has since been rescinded. On April 19, 1842, the Reverend David Page of Trinity Episcopal Church married Mrs. Anna Dunbar Smith to Thomas Affleck in the town of Washington. He gained a wife, a stepson, Calvin Smith, and a father-in-law who went to great pains to protect his daughter's property from her new husband. He drew up a marriage contract that gave Affleck no control of his wife's property, which would remain always hereafter as the sole and separate property of said Anna M. Smith. In August 1842, just a few months after their marriage, Thomas and Anna Affleck began construction on a grand new house on a 4.52-acre tract earlier given to Anna by her parents. Several entries in the ledgers of the Andrew Brown sawmill at Natchez under the Hill document the sale of the building materials to Affleck. The house was completed and named Ingleside by October of 1843, as you can see from this newspaper article. This historic photograph of Ingleside's facade dates to 1936 and was taken as part of the Historic American Building Survey. This rear view documents the center recessed porch, which had been partially enclosed as a screen porch by this 1936 image. I will end this lecture by giving you a photographic tour of Ingleside as it looks today. The house almost abuts Jefferson College campus and is set back from Highway 61 north behind the roadside motel of small colonial-style buildings that was created on the highway edge of the Ingleside property around 1945. Thomas Affleck was interested in anything related to agriculture, botany, and horticulture. Natchez newspapers and Affleck's own publications testify to the depth and breadth of his interest and knowledge. One notice that he published in the Mississippi Free Trader predates his marriage and documents his interest in engineering. In January 1842, he invited planters in the vicinity to come see a corn and cob crushing machine in operation at Sissoff's mill at the upper landing, which would have been at the head of Leonardsville Road. He frequently sent notices to Natchez newspapers that shared his knowledge. One notice in 1848 provided information about hedging with the Cherokee Rose, and he included for publication an article on the subject that had appeared in DeBow's Commercial Review. He noted that he had learned that well-rooted plants were superior to cuttings, and also pointed out that at one time he had held a different opinion. In March 1852, he placed an advertisement for his business, the Southern Nurseries, and noted that there was still time to plant fruit trees, and it was absolutely the best time to transplant evergreens. Affleck sold plants retail to individuals and wholesale to other nurseries. He also sent flatboats loaded with plants downriver to sell to planters in Louisiana. In the fall of 1852, he placed an advertisement for strawberries, evergreen shrubs, and fruit trees. He also advertised a variety of catalogs with descriptions and prices, as well as hints for planting and pruning, etc. In March 1853, he advertised hardy evergreens and shrubs, including cedar, holly, balsam fir, black and red spruce, Norway spruce, European silver fir, English laurel, and Scotch broom. An 1854 advertisement documents the evolution of his nursery business to include his publications, the Southern Rural Almanac, Affleck's Cotton Plantation Record and Account Books, and Affleck's Sugar Plantation Record and Account Books. Testifying to the popularity of his almanacs and record and account books is the survival of so many of them in Southern archival collections. This 1854 advertisement also included an ad for pure and unadulterated Peruvian guano. Pictured on the left is an advertisement for a new edition of Affleck's Plantation Record and Account Book. On the right is one of the pre-printed pages filled out. This page is headed Record of Physicians' Visits to the Sick, etc., upon plantation during the year 1850. These books were especially useful to planters who had multiple plantations and some managed by overseers. Pictured here are 2 years of Affleck's Southern Rural Almanac and Plantation and Garden Calendar. These are for 1856 and 1857. As he promoted his businesses, Affleck engaged in a good bit of travel. He became particularly intrigued by the possibilities of Texas. He had never been financially successful in the Natchez area and thought that he might have better luck in Texas. In 1858, he bought a plantation named Glen Blythe in Gay Hill, Washington County, Texas, and in 1860 moved his family there and sold Ingleside. Benjamin L.C. Wales of Meade Villa in Washington recorded in his diary that he had witnessed the family's departure from Ingleside in a covered wagon headed for Texas. Affleck became a Texan in heart and soul and even traveled to Europe to promote immigration to the state. He continued his agricultural, horticultural, and botanical pursuits, but he was even less financially successful in Texas than he was in Mississippi. Affleck died unexpectedly in 1868, and his wife died not long afterwards in 1870 or 1871. Thomas Affleck is sometimes identified as the father of Texas horticulture. However, all that remains of Thomas Affleck in Texas today is a Texas Historical Commission historic marker and a simple tombstone for him and his wife, Anna. His legacy in Mississippi is much greater. His descriptions of gardens and landscapes in Natchez are important historic documents. He was undoubtedly instrumental in promoting ornamental horticulture in the Natchez region, which numerous travelers prior to 1840 described as largely neglected. He was also an important intellectual addition to the community of Jefferson College. And lastly, his legacy includes his home in Washington, Mississippi. To learn more about Thomas Affleck, I recommend the 2014 book by Lake Douglas entitled Steward of the Land, Selected Writings of 19th Century Horticulturist Thomas Affleck, which rightfully places him alongside his better-known contemporaries, Andrew Jackson Downing and Frederick Law Olmsted. Now, I'll end this presentation today with a photographic tour of Affleck's home, Ingleside, in Washington, Mississippi. So this is the front of the house as it appears today. It's in very good condition, and you'll see that it looks very similar to the historic photographs of the house from 1936. This is a close-up of the detail around the front door. On the left, you'll see that the door was copied from a pattern book by Asher Benjamin. The house has a surprising scale. It doesn't look like it's that large from the front, but you can see from the side that it's actually a fairly spacious house. And this is a view of that front door from the interior. It's in the main hallway looking back. The floor plan is a hallway and 4 rooms with a half floor above and a basement below. But this is looking towards the other end of the hall with a staircase coming down. And that is the back door that goes out into what was the recessed porch and was a screen porch in the historic image, but is now a glassed-in porch. In the view of this room, you can see just what a fine house it is. The elaborate plaster work, the marble mantelpieces, the dimensions of the room are quite large. This is the elaborate plaster medallion in the center of the room. Lots of Greek Revival detail. This is the marble mantelpiece with the fully engaged Ionic columns. A very fine mantelpiece. This is the dining room. It's unusual, not only because of its size, but it's one of the houses in Natchez that has a punka, which is the fan hanging above the table. And a slave servant would pull a rope attached to the top of the punka to fan the diners as they ate and also try to keep bugs away from the food. And what's unusual about this punka is that it's in the shape of a woman wearing a hoop skirt. You can see it kind of goes in for her waist and then comes back out for the skirt, and even has hair and what looks like little earrings at the top. So that concludes my presentation on Thomas Affleck. So now we'll have time for some questions and answers.
Great, thank you, Carter. One of the first questions that's come in says, could you describe exactly where Ingleside is located?
So if you're traveling north on Highway 61 and you leave Natchez and you come into the town of Washington, Ingleside is on the left, just before you get to Jefferson College. There is a small roadside motel out in front, and it's right by the intersection where Morgantown Road comes out to Highway 61. But the house itself sits kind of back from the road. You can see it, but you have to kind of look through the gate and up the driveway.
Very good. And following up on another question related to Ingleside, is there still evidence of any of Affleck's landscaping and plants on the grounds of Ingleside today?
There are. There's some terracing there, and I believe there are some fruit trees that are still remaining on the site. That was the site of the nursery. He conducted his nursery business there on the grounds of Ingleside. Of course, it ceased to exist once he sold it and moved to Texas, but there are some remains of his landscape there today.
I have a question. How far out did his landscape business reach? Just the Natchez community or beyond?
No, he was shipping plants and seeds all over the Southeast. He would ship things up and down the river, and he shipped a lot of plants down to New Orleans and up and down the river between Natchez and New Orleans. But his reach was all over the Southeast.
Very good. I'll ask our moderator, Emily, if we have any additional questions.
That's it for the questions. However, I did have a comment from a teacher saying that it would be interesting to share the acclimated fruit trees ad with students and have them do a comparative analysis on it on a typical print ad today. She didn't really have a question, but it made me wonder if y'all allow classes and students to come into Historic Natchez Foundation and do things like that.
Oh yeah, we absolutely do. Education is a large part of our mission, and I'd be happy to share the slideshow or any individual slides or the images on those. I can share them with you, Emily, and you can get them to her, or she can reach out to me directly. Either way, we'd be happy to share that.
For sure, I'd be happy to facilitate that. And we did have one final question. Is this house ever available on tour?
It's a privately owned house, and it was recently sold in the last few years. I believe the new owners would make it available occasionally on tour. The Historic Natchez Foundation held a tour of houses in Washington several years ago, and this house was included. So occasionally it has been on tour.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. I want to thank you, Carter, for presenting for us today, and Lance, thank you for doing the introduction and moderating. Again, I encourage everyone to continue to tune in throughout the week, like and share, and please fill out a survey. I will post one in the comments of this event. It'll also be going around. It's one survey. You can take it per event or for the whole entire conference. Oh wait, one more question. I'm gonna ask one more question. Are there any horticultural tours in Natchez or plans to have one?
There's not really that I know of. The grounds at Melrose, which is owned by the National Park Service, has a pretty good horticultural tour of the plants that they have out there. And I know also at the Green Village, you know, a lot of plants and trees are identified. But those are probably the two best places to have a horticultural tour in Natchez. Of course, the pilgrimage was originally originated as a garden tour, and then it morphed into a house tour. But there's none in the works that I know of. There are other festivals, the Crepe Myrtle Festival and things like that have to do with horticulture around Natchez.
All right, good deal. Well, hopefully somebody should take the initiative and start one. All right, thank you again, and thanks for everybody for tuning in, and hope y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.